America is sick, and the statistics don't lie. Despite spending $4.5 trillion annually on healthcare, our nation ranks 60th in life expectancy worldwide. But why? Joining me now is Ways2Well Founder Brigham Buhler to help us sort it all out. All right, Brigham, I know that this is an incredibly complicated issue, one we're not going to solve over the course of a podcast interview. However, there's been a lot of attention on RFK Jr., our new HHS secretary, and what we can do to make our food better, what we can do to make the pharmaceutical industry better, what we can do to make America less sick and fat and tired. So I want to have the conversation as holistically as possible. What do you think is the key to sorting this all out, or at least starting down that path?
Well, I mean, I think it always starts with food, right? Food is nutrition, and nutrition drives health span. And so definitely our food systems are corrupted and co-opted. But beyond that, it goes into our alphabet organizations like the FDA, the NIH, Human Health Services. That's where I'm thankful that we've got Bobby in a position of power to hopefully drive change. One of the things I've been blowing the whistle on for years is the corporate capture of our institutions. Like beyond the capture of the FDA is the capture of our pharmacy benefit managers and all of these institutions that were put in place to help fight for us, the American people. And those institutions now, rather than fight for our health and our longevity, are fighting for quarterly earnings and quarterly profits of the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, there's been much more of a spotlight on all of that, of course, after the stupid era that was COVID. So a lot of distrust was bred in the American public over big pharma and, corporate America's contribution to big pharma and all of it being an entangled web and mess. Not something that's probably going to be sorted out, entirely anytime soon. But let's talk about the food element of all of this. We know that RFK Jr. wants to work with some of these big food companies. He wants to make sure that, if we've got 12,000 ingredients and Europe has a couple hundred, why do we have all this and they don't? Why don't we have more regulation? I'm not a regulation happy person, but when it comes to some of these dyes and flavorings and all of this put into our food that's being allowed to be put in our food, at some point, I would hope that there would be a change. Are you optimistic that even with an HHS secretary like RFK Jr., that is achievable given what you know about the corporate capture of pretty much everything?
Yeah, it's going to be a long uphill battle. I mean, it's a valid point, and I think that that's where consumers have to fight with their pocketbook, right? We saw after our Senate testimony against Kellogg's, the Kellogg's stock price tanked, candidly. And Kellogg's has refused to concede. And I think it goes beyond that. Like, if we look at it, and Callie Means has done a very eloquent job of breaking down how this corporate capture has happened and big tobacco pivoted to capture our big food industry. And all the checks and balances have been removed. Like this chronic disease crisis that we're facing, as you follow throughout the system, and you go from the food to our ability to have accessibility to proactive predictive care, that's obstructed. And that's obstructed by the insurance companies themselves. Because what a little dirty secret that a lot of Americans don't know is the insurance companies are getting paid off of your prescription medicines. So that's partially why the average American's on 4 or more prescription drugs. If I'm an executive at one of these big healthcare institutions and I'm looking at hitting my quarterly earnings and my quarterly profits, and I know that, a big chunk of my revenue comes from prescription drug care, then I'm going to push people to prescription drug care.
Yeah. Well, it's scary to think about. It really is, because the average person feels like they're so caught up in it, and it's almost impossible to fight back against this behemoth as an individual, or even, as a collective of individuals, because it's just such a powerful lobby and it's such a powerful system. You brought up pharmaceuticals and you brought up prescription drugs and all of this. And we know that in the United States, they can advertise direct to consumer. So people see, I see, 6, 7, 8 commercials, no matter what network I'm watching, that are, advertising with some song and dance, some drug that people ought to be on. And then the side effect list is often longer and more dangerous than the diagnosis crisis or the problem that you had to begin with. What do you think that we can do to help sort out some of that, for an average person who feels like they can't buck the system because the system's too big?
I do think the system's big and it's going to take time to change, but that's where I push people to take sovereignty and autonomy over their health. Again, if we look at the system and we break it down step by step, one of the problems is the revolving door between these three-letter alphabet organizations like the FDA and the NIH, and how often they go to work for industry. 10 out of the last 11 heads of the FDA have gone to work for the very industry they were supposed to be protecting and regulating. If we look over at the NIH and Human Health Services, a large percentage of those individuals have also gone to work for industry. Back to the insurance industry, the head of HHS that helped push through Obamacare went to go work for the pharmacy benefit managers that were given the golden goose contracts that Obamacare opened up for those individuals. And so this revolving door combined with direct-to-consumer advertising are two of the easy low-hanging fruits that we could, through just some increased regulatory guidelines, hopefully prevent and cut the head of the snake off. Let's not allow people to go work for the very people they're supposed to be regulating a month after leaving, public service.
Yeah, the bureaucracy just seems to have its tentacles in everything. And on the other side of that too, I mentioned earlier, obviously because of COVID and the COVID vax mandate, a lot of individuals are like, listen, I'm out. Like, I don't trust any of this stuff. I don't trust it for my kids. I don't trust it for my family. I don't trust it for myself. People don't want to get even the basic shots that have always been considered safe or rather mundane, measles being one of them. We have an outbreak of measles now, especially in rural areas where people are like, you're not jabbing me with anything. I don't trust it. And, maybe we have run the risk of going too far the other way. It's like some of these things, are probably not dangerous. But what do you think about the upcoming study that's going to be done linking some vaccines to autism? That's been very taboo, right? So RFK Jr., of course, in his confirmation hearings was repeatedly drilled about that. And, the line has always been, there's been no link. And then he's like, well, maybe we need to study it. Now it looks like there might actually be a study on it. Do you think we're actually going to get real information on this, or will the interested parties squash it?
I think it's a hybrid. I think that's a great question. But if you look at health, like when we talk about health and diagnosing chronic disease, in medicine, we say to understand chronic disease, you have to identify the root cause. And to uncover, what's really going on in our institutions, we're going to have to do a deep dive and we're going to have to find the root cause. And that root cause is going to include being able to ask the question and have a healthy dialogue. Why are our autism rates through the roof? Why are diabetes, cancer rates, depression, anxiety, deaths of despair at an all-time high greater than that of the Great Depression? We can no longer blindly trust our institutions and big pharma to look out for the American people. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, we need a little bit more information here. And one of the crazy stats that I've learned over the last year being part of this MAHA movement is the third leading cause of death in this country is medical misdiagnosis and misuse. The third leading cause of death, right? And we have 1.7 million people dying every year of chronic disease, greater than every war we've ever fought as a nation. So something we're doing is not working. And it's a culmination of our food, of our organizations that are supposed to be protecting us from the corruption of big pharma. But we can't allow these big insurance and pharmaceutical conglomerates to ride away scot-free without any checks or balances. And I think that what Bobby's doing is great, because what we're saying is let's look deeper. Like, correlation may not be causation, but there's enough evidence here to show that there is some sort of correlation occurring with Americans' health and our food and our medical establishments.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a fair point. It's also the lifestyle. Everybody's just buried in the phone and the video games and that kind of, instant thrill of just going on a device and not really having to go out and play or use your imagination, use your, physicality to do things. I worry for young people, especially, that they're not being as active as maybe even my generation was, going outside and just exercising your mind and your body. That doesn't seem to be a primary focus anymore. A lot of the anger when we saw, of course, the horrific and tragic murder of the United Healthcare CEO, a lot of people were like cheering for that because they hate the healthcare industry. Where I understand the anger at the healthcare industry, it seems like a lot of the anger is like, they're not covering this, they're not covering that. But what you're saying is the anger isn't just over not covering this and not covering that. You're saying maybe some of the anger should be, hey, you're pushing me on this, or you're pushing me on that, or maybe we have too many drugs, or maybe we're prescribing too many drugs. That's not really talked about, though, when people express anger at, the healthcare industry. So what more can you say on that point?
No, you're spot on. And the only reason I have line of sight into this is because of being an entrepreneur in the healthcare space. I candidly had no idea. I lost my brother to the opioid crisis. And at the time, I had a non-abusive, non-addictive compounding pharmacy that offered alternatives to doctors other than opioids. And I would go out and educate clinicians on the importance of not writing an opioid. There are alternatives out there. But what I saw is the insurance companies would obstruct, delay, deny, and oppose. And they would stop the clinician from being able to prescribe an alternative and instead push that patient back to an opioid. And at the time, I didn't understand why until I got a deeper look behind the curtain. What you find out is roughly 30% of the revenue generated from opioids ended up going to the insurance companies. In any other industry, we'd call that a kickback. But in healthcare, we call it business as usual. And it's a tragedy. How many innocent Americans died because of the FDA's failure to regulate? I don't know if you know this, but the head of the FDA at the time that ramrodded opioids into the market went to go work for Purdue Pharma, the family that launched the opioids 18 months later for a big salary. Our insurance companies that are supposed to provide checks and balances and be a support system to us, the people who pay premiums every month for healthcare, deny and force us to other medications. And so it's not just that they're obstructing your ability to get surgical procedures or treatments that are necessary, life-saving or life-changing. It's also that there is an incentive for us to be on medications because of the rebate programs that these pharmacy benefit managers have established. And so Trump and Bobby Kennedy have talked about the middlemen. Those middlemen they've been corporately captured. So originally, pharmacy benefit managers were established to fight for you and I, for the American people, to drive down the cost of our prescription drug care. And what a lot of people didn't realize is in the 90s, the big insurance companies came out and gobbled up those PBMs. And rather than negotiating down the price of drugs, they started negotiating up the price of medications through rebate programs. And so there's dollars being traded on every medicine that touches a human life. And we're fitting the bill, not just in our pocketbooks, but in human capital and human lives.
So it's astonishing that this is happening, but it's also not astonishing because people are motivated by money. And that's the dirty part about all of this is it's like the very same people that are doing this also have families. And I would assume they don't want their families hooked on opioids or other drugs. They don't want them dependent on pharmaceuticals for the rest of their lives. But the money speaks so loudly, whether you're in the healthcare industry, you're in medicine, you're in insurance, it doesn't matter. Money is just, it's the root of all evil. But I don't know how you root that out because it's like, as you mentioned, you try to root something out and then people find ways to make money in nefarious ways with a workaround or even worse. So how do you go about, even besides what RFK Jr. is trying to do and the Trump administration is trying to do and the Make America Healthy Again movement is trying to do, how does an individual themselves buck that system when it's always going to be motivated by money?
I think one of the ways we do it is we do separate the corporate capture, right? If we could stop the insurance companies from monetizing chronic disease through the middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers, that's a regulatory change. Fixing our food system, which I know Bobby is working on. All of these are going to take years. So in the meantime, what I always tell patients and individuals out there that are trying to sort through the chaos is you have to start thinking of insurance as you do car insurance. It's there if you total the car, But if you're expecting the insurance carriers to honor and have integrity about yours and your family's health and help practice predictive preventative medicine, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because those insurance companies don't rotate the tires, change the oil, maintain the vehicle. They wait for you to blow a motor, and then they monetize your catastrophic event. And so if you can get proactive and predictive, if you can take yourself out of that ecosystem, it's as simple as like an annual blood test through a cash pay clinic in your area, would give you much more insight to anything you're ever going to get in an insurance-based model. And that's one of the things we try to do at Ways2Well is make healthcare affordable and approachable, and give the sovereignty, the autonomy, and the education back to the patient. Because the American people aren't stupid. They've been lied to, they've been duped, and they've been sold a bad bill of goods. But what I've seen is the average American does care about their health. Despite what the statistics are showing, like you alluded to earlier, children outside and playing, we built that ecosystem. We put them in a school and we lock them in a room and we tell them to sit down and don't move, and they don't get any sunlight. And then if they're hyperactive, we put them on ADHD meds. And like, we've created our own prison. And it's sad. And I think it was, I was with Tim Kennedy. I don't know if you know who that is, the other day at a Maha event.
Yep.
And Tim broke down, I didn't even know this. I thought it was 50%. Tim told me over 70% of individuals cannot qualify for military service right now. I mean, it's not just a risk to our national security. It's a travesty to think that many Americans are that chronically ill and sick. And these are young, able-bodied Americans who are so chronically riddled with disease and illness that they can't qualify for military service. That's terrifying.
It really is. It feels like it all hit us at once too. And then people started to pay more attention to it. And then, of course, you have an influencer culture that is very granola, and that feels like it's the answer. But it's hard for the average person to keep up with that as well, because not everybody is a mommy blogger who has the time and the energy, to do all those. And it feels like every time you turn around, they tell you something else is toxic for you, and becomes so overwhelming for people that it's like they don't even really know what to do. And then you've got the vaccines. Which ones do you do? Which ones do you not do? It's hard for young parents. They don't know where to turn. Like, they want to go the way of natural raw and all this, but then, then you run the risk of a measles outbreak, and it's very, very overwhelming. For the person that's just curious about this, and they're very curious about the way that they could have autonomy and independence and take control of their healthcare and their wellness as an individual or as a family, where would you tell them to start?
I think it starts with taking a look under the hood. And that's one of the challenges with our existing ecosystem. So again, not to paint too dark of a picture, but if the food system's letting us down, right? And now we're chronically malnourished, our caloric dense processed foods lead to chronic disease. But then the safety net is we should be getting comprehensive blood work and a deep dive, at least annually, from our clinicians. Well, guess what? The insurance companies have severed that. I own blood labs that would go out and educate clinicians on the importance of pulling comprehensive blood work and assessing you at the biological level, because the cancer that you develop in your 40s started in your 30s. The diabetes you develop in your 30s started in your 20s, right? Chronic disease we see coming from a mile away. Like, there are cancer screenings out there that can identify over 200 types of cancer at stage 0. Those are not being offered to patients in the insurance-based model. Because again, what I'm imploring your listeners to understand is this is not about driving your health and wellness and helping you and your family. This is about monetizing chronic disease and maximizing quarterly earnings and profits. And that is the biggest challenge of the system. And so where we can prevent that is through getting proactive and predictive, right? If you were to just do an annual blood workup and spend 45 minutes on the phone with a clinician, you can get all of the line of sight and all the tools necessary to offset and prevent chronic disease. We know what diseases you're headed towards, but it takes having the blood work, doing the analysis, and having the time. And the average American today gets 6 minutes with their primary care. 6 minutes. And the primary care is not able to pull the blood work. That was what I learned when I owned blood labs. I educated these clinicians on the importance of getting proactive and predictive, and they all agree. This makes total sense. We should do this. We should do a deep dive and prevent these chronic diseases from happening. But as soon as they would pull the blood work, within 30 to 45 days, they would start getting letters from the insurance companies threatening them. And the insurance companies will bully and intimidate clinicians into not honoring your health care that you've paid for. They literally, they scare and intimidate you out of getting the necessary treatments.
So I want to break that down a little bit so that I make sure I understand it and my audience understands it.
Yeah.
So you've got people that are like, hey, a blood test for a lot of people are like, oh, listen, I can go get a blood test. Like that doesn't seem like it's so far out of bounds. But for a lot of folks, they get their blood work, and you're telling me that the insurance companies have a vested interest in not paying for blood work. And from what I'm hearing from you, it's because they don't want you to know some of these underlying things because then you could fix them too easily or too quickly. Am I getting, the correct narrative from what you're telling me?
It is. It's multifaceted. So yes, one, anything that costs the insurance money that is not tied to a rebate or reimbursement. And again, in other spaces, we'd call that a kickback. So if there's money being made off prescription drug care and you come into a primary care clinic where they could do a workup and diagnose that you're pre-diabetic, and we could get proactive and predictive and prevent you from transitioning to diabetes, which we know is a 7-fold increase in the cost of care and a detriment to you living a healthy, happy life, you'd say, why wouldn't you do that? Well, the answer is the average person transfers jobs every 2.5 years. So if I sit on a board at one of these, big institutions, I go, well, if we kick the can down the road, we prescribe insulin and metformin and products that we can monetize off of our PBM rebate programs. When this becomes a catastrophic event 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, statistically speaking, this individual will no longer be our problem. They will either be the problem of another insurer or they will be the problem of the taxpayer via Medicare, Medicaid, because most of our expenses occur after the age of 65. And so these chronic diseases right now cost us a lot of money via prescription drugs, but they're not, there's money being made by the insurance companies to not rush in and treat. Does that make sense? Versus surgery,
right.
It's just all an out-of-pocket expense. It's a loss leader. And so insurance companies have no incentive to approve surgeries. They're incentivized actually the opposite, to obstruct, delay, and deny. And when we look at, you mentioned Luigi and the United Healthcare CEO, what happened there was tragic. It's terrible. Obviously, there's no condoning what happened. But when you look at the reasoning behind it, and you look at the American public's response to that, and you dig a little deeper, you can begin to understand where the frustration comes from. And that frustration comes from, the fact that last year, I think United denied 37% of initial claims. That is a lot of initial claims. And then what a lot of people don't realize is less than 10% of claims get disputed. So most people give up once they reach that first roadblock.
Yeah.
And now what? If you're talking about a spine injury, you're talking about that individual is going to get put on an opioid to address the pain. And now within 6 months, they're addicted to opioids and they're caught in a cycle, and that wrecks their endocrine system and their hormone levels. And you can begin to see how we are so riddled with chronic disease. It's because the system isn't broken. It is rigged. It's rigged, and we are fitting the bill time and time again, and not just financially, with our health and our longevity.
It's you paint a dark picture that a lot of people are like, damn, I knew this was happening. But, I think most people understand that everything is motivated by money. And it's just really a shame that it's like that. I don't see that ending or changing anytime soon. In the couple of minutes that I have left with you, I do want to ask your take on something that I've often been really curious about, and I don't know how to feel about it. And I'm wondering if you have a perspective. So there's been a lot of discussion about fertility treatments and IVF. This is obviously a huge business. It's very, very expensive. A lot of people are having kids later in life. They're turning to it. I have a lot of friends who were in their late 30s, early 40s. freeze your eggs, freeze your embryos, do all this stuff. I mean, it really is for my generation, for millennials. Like, we were brought up in this environment where it's become so commonplace that you talk to anybody my age, and a lot of them have had kids through IVF. Now, the skeptic in me worries about it because I'm like, wow, it doesn't seem natural. It seems like, are we going to find something out about this? Or, is there an incentive again with this healthcare system to push everybody to freeze their eggs and do IVF and inject hormones and all this fertility care? It's so expensive. It seems like a moneymaker. Do you have any initial red flags about this ecosystem that maybe we should be aware of?
Well, the bigger red flag is, why are we on the cusp of infertility as a species? Like, that's the big red flag. Think about it. Girls are starting periods 6 years earlier. 100% of men tested had microplastics in their testicles. Men's testosterone levels are at an all-time low. Our testosterones are half of that of our grandfathers. Men's fertility rates, so often women get blamed and carry the burden of the fertility, but an exorbitant amount of the time, it's their partner. It's the male that has a really low sperm count. Male sperm counts are at, I think, 39 billion sperm per whatever deciliter, whatever the number is. It's 37 million is like infertile. And so it is on the cusp of infertility as a species. And it goes back to, we're chronically ill and chronically sick. And the answer shouldn't be, how do we sell you more treatments? It should be, how do we fix the root cause and uncover what is causing our infertility issues? And then if we look at even the treatment of infertility, as a compounding pharmacy owner, we compound HCG, which is a fertility drug. And again, this is a drug that's been off patent for over 20 years. It should be readily available in the marketplace. It should be extremely cost effective. But Big Pharma tries to lobby and force the FDA into restricting compounding pharmacies' ability to offer this to a marketplace, because they're making so much money selling you a 20-year-old drug that shouldn't be the price point it is in the first place. And I hate to say it, it does show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome. If we monetize and profiteer off of infertility, you're going to see a sky-high increase in infertility rates, because there's so much money in selling you the cure, rather than uncovering the root cause and treating the root cause, not the symptomology.
Right. Well, I really appreciate all of your knowledge. Again, we're not going to get to the bottom of all of this in a 35-minute podcast, but I think you've given a lot of people a lot to think about and a lot to digest. And that's why this movement is so important. And I hope that we can at least chip away at it. It's not going to be done overnight, but we got to make a change. So people understanding the problem and the evil where it lies, that's at least a start there. So I really appreciate all the knowledge and peeling back these layers. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. If people want to hear more from you and more on what you're doing and more on, everything that you preach and teach and instruct, where do they go to find you?
Our company is Ways2Well, WELL. And then we've done a lot of podcasts. I've done Rogan and Tucker and some of your peers in the podcast world. And then mine's just Brigham.Buhler is my Instagram. But a lot of what we're doing is we're posting on Instagram. We're trying to provide educational content and just give people sovereignty and autonomy over their health. We can drive change, but it starts with ourselves.
Knowledge is power. Thank you so much, Brigham, for joining me. I really appreciate all the knowledge that you gave us, and I hope everyone will check out Ways2Well and find out more information. That's the first step. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Folks, that does it for this very special, very informative, slightly depressing episode of Tomi Lahren is Fearless. But like we said, knowledge is power. So make sure that you take complete and total control of your health and your family's health. That's the best way to start the Make America and Make Your Family Healthy Again journey. Thanks so much for watching. As always, you can catch full episodes of this show on Outkick.com, on Fox Nation, of course, at the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.